up to what you think he's trying to tell us. Because an artist is trying to communicate an idea. It's a visual idea, but it is an idea. So, for example, where do you want to start? What do you see repeated?
There's
yes.
a lot of symmetry between on both sides of a, sort of a path or trees.
Yeah,
and
good
both
for you.
sides of that,
Absolutely. Yeah, so there was something he put here that used to be trees, but now, to be quite specific, they are vertical bands of color capped off by sort of an oval-like shape or an oval geometric-like shape of flattened green and blue color units, not trees, correct? Because there are no trees here. That create, because of their position in space and because they're positioned in the center of this picture, kind of a tunnel that your eye slips into that takes you back to this unit, this brown unit that was a church, but there's actually a space created here that your eye slips into. And that is balanced on both sides by these boxy rectilineal color units. Not buildings, boxy rectilineal color units. Do you hear the difference? Because the picture now has less to do with this courtyard in Manayunk than you might think. The subject essentially begins to die as the picture is born. It goes away because it's not here, just as I am not in that camera. And you don't need to know much about me to understand that little picture in the camera. Or, to be more precise, since this exhibit is still on in Philadelphia, if you go to the Frida Kahlo exhibit in Philadelphia, this is Self-Portrait with Monkeys done in 1943, and you put the headphones on, what are the headphones going to tell you about this picture, do you think? And some of you may have already done this. Where she got the monkey. Right. The headphones will tell you all about Frida Kahlo. Who she was, what she looked like, the clothes she wore, where she got the monkeys, where she got the parrots, why she posed herself with monkeys or parrots, all about her life, her suffering, her marriage, her divorce, all of it. And you're looking at this. And none of that helps you understand this. That's my point. None of that helps you understand this because this is not her. This is colors on a flat surface. This is what you have to learn to read. This is what we're trying to read now. Okay, so good, we got to start. We have a push back into space. It's balanced on both sides by these little boxy color units. What else? Yes?
He loves rhythm of line.
All right, where do you see some?
Well, you take underneath the bench to the left, and then you have 3 legs to the bench.
Yeah.
And then you go in, you see the trees, they're in threes, and the shadows are in threes.
Okay.
You look at the houses, they step back in threes.
Okay.
And you look at the porch pillars, and they're in threes.
Okay.
You go to the right, and there's a step up, 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
He just goes on, and visually in his mind, he's thinking threes.
He may be thinking threes, he may just be thinking these lines. But yes, the balance is there. The repetition, notice whatever this was, cell tower, who knows, but very much of the same linear format as you see through here. The same linear format, and it gets even smaller as you start looking into these color units, which probably was grass when he started. These lines are still there. And so these little slivers of lines are repeating and repeating and repeating all through this picture in very different ways. Some thicker, some thinner, some longer, some shorter. But just like you heard in the music, just like in the Beethoven, there's the repetition with variety of a theme that he's trying to build. Now, the lines do something else that we haven't said yet. Yes?
Well, there's a variation on a theme, and you can start creating shapes. And you see the little patties of shade in the front.
Yep.
The soft units.
Okay.
And then as you go back, they get harsher.
Okay. So there's some in the front that are softer, perhaps more pastel-like, you could argue. And then they get very dense and deep as your eye recedes into space. And notice something we haven't talked about are the curves. So there's not just straight lines, but there's also curved lines that interact with those straight lines to set up a drama of curves against straights as well. So there's that going on too. What about the color? What about this kind of orange against this dark purple-black? Or the reds against the yellows, ochres, or the blues in that background against some of these pinks. What does that do? What kind of quality does that create? Okay. Yeah, there is a vibrancy and a liveliness of color. How much space actually is there? Is there deep space in this, would you say? We know our eye goes back through here into that sort of tunnel of space. But what happens after that? What happens here, for example, or here? Do you keep going back into space? Does the space? No, it doesn't, does it? So these colors in their, notice, boxy geometry, echoing the boxy geometry you see down here, close that space off. It was a sky in its former life, but now it is simply rectilineal color shapes creating very subtle recessions of space, very subtle planes of space. And that comes from a tradition. It comes out of Cubism. You could see if you just abstracted this little part, you might mistake it for an analytical Cubist painting. But then notice what happens. You get down into this area and you have fully three-dimensional objects. So you have Cubism superimposed with fully three-dimensional projections in space. It's a weaving together of more volume in the color units themselves than you would ever find in an analytical Cubist painting. That tells you that he's done something to and with the tradition he borrowed from. And all artists obviously borrow from the traditions that preceded them in order to say their say. And then their job is to give it back with something of their own that we've never seen before. And we can spend some time, which we don't have, as to whether Eddie Loper Jr. has done such a thing, but that would take us the entire course. There's things in this picture we cannot even begin to uncover and see yet because you don't have enough of the tools. When you take the course, when we teach the course, and if you were one of our students, as I started with this chart, we go through all of these. And in many cases, some of them, creative distortion takes 2 or 3 classes to get through. Unity and variety takes 4 classes to get through. Transferred value, I believe, take 2 for subject and subject matter. In some cases, some of these concepts take us more than 1 2 or 3 hour session to make clear to students. And most of what we do when we teach is give students ample opportunity to practice, 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 because if you don't use this method, you never get a hold of it. If you just listen to it, it won't do it for you. You have to actually go out there and do the work and work in the classroom in the same way in order for you to fully master it. But once you do, you can come upon any picture, anywhere, and you are able then to achieve an understanding of it, an appreciation of it, which is really what we're talking about. And I have that written here somewhere, I think. This is, of course, an objective aesthetic appreciation. All we mean by appreciation is you enjoy it by understanding it. That's what the word means. And it's objective because you focus on the object. And when you have that, essentially, understanding of that picture, then the experience is complete. So to sum this up, and I do have to stop, an artist goes out into the world or stays in his studio, whatever he does, he confronts a subject. That subject does something to him, and he does something to it. In other words, it activates his interest. He's able to see into it and uncover meanings in it that interest him. And at that moment, at that first interested look, he has an idea. We call it an intent, a design, a purpose. It all means the same thing. He knows what he's going to do. And I remember when this happens to me, it's like walking past something you've seen every day of your life for 20 years, and one day you stop and look at it and you say, oh, I could make a picture of that. It's as though it shifts. Something shifts, like a camera when it shifts into focus. And at that moment, you're beginning to do things to it even though you don't know you are. Eliminating things, moving things, making things bigger, making things smaller, changing things, whatever it is you're doing, it's for the sake of the idea that you're trying to give birth to. When you do that, you keep inventing new matter, just as my daughter-in-law did with the sled. She had to bring new stuff to it. The paper, the liner, the pillows, the blankets, the rope. She had to bring new stuff to it to make it into what she wanted it to be. An artist brings new matter, new kinds of color, new kinds of spatial relationships, new kinds of lines and light to help him express the meaning he's trying to give birth to. And all the relationships he has to establish are between light, line, color, and space. And that becomes the picture. We, when we learn the method, start with the picture. We look at, and we did it just very briefly today, all the relationships, light, line, color, and space. We look at the matter that this artist has created as best he can do, his kind of color, his kind of space. That gives us an idea of what he was after, the picture idea, the intent. And when we understand that, and then take our time to work with that picture, we then share that communication that occurred way up here. We understand why that artist painted that picture that way from the get-go. That, in a nutshell, is what this process is about. And as I've explained to you, sounds simple, sounds like it should be able to be done in a half hour or an hour. Not so, not so. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes patience to learn it, but once you've got it for life, and no matter what you look at, whether they're pictures in a museum or pictures on your own wall or a beautiful day outside, your visual perception becomes enriched by the experience. And best of all, once you perhaps learn to view the world, say, as Eddie Loper Jr. does, then you can go out into your world and start to see it through his eyes. So your own life experience becomes enriched. And all of this has to do with visual appreciation, what I like to call informed perception. That's what we're really teaching, informed perception.